Welcome to the channel where we are translating the great script of Bhagavad Gita in simple and understandable language for everyone. We are also providing the background of the Shloka to provide context of why those words are spoken by the Lord Krishna. Have a great journey to decode the mystery of Bhagavad Gita.
Dehinosmin yatha dehe Kaumaram yauvanam jara Tatha dehantara praptihi Dhirastatra na muhyati.
Translation. Just as the embodied soul continuously passes from childhood to youth to old age, similarly, at the time of death, the soul passes into another body. The wise are not deluded by this. Explanation. With immaculate logic, Sri Krishna establishes the principle of transmigration of the soul from lifetime to lifetime. He explains that in one lifetime itself, we change bodies from childhood to youth to maturity and then to old age. In fact, modern science informs us that cells within the body undergo regeneration, old cells die away and new ones take their place. It is estimated that within 7 years, practically all the cells of the body change. Further, the molecules within the cells change even more rapidly. With every breath we inhale, oxygen molecules are absorbed into our cells via the metabolic processes, and molecules that were heretofore locked within the cells are released as carbon dioxide. Scientists estimate that in 1 year's time, about 98% of our bodily molecules change. And yet, despite the continual change of the body, we perceive that we are the same person. That is because we are not the material body, but the spiritual soul seated within.
Matra sparshastu kaunteya Shitoshna sukha dukkadaha Agamapayino nitya Tansi tikshasva bharata.
Translation. O son of Kunti, the contact between the senses and the sense objects gives rise to fleeting perceptions of happiness and distress. These are non-permanent and come and go like the winter and summer seasons. O descendant of Bharat, one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. Explanation. The human body houses 5 senses, the senses of sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing, and these, in contact with their objects of perception, give rise to sensations of happiness and distress. None of these sensations is permanent. They come and go like the changing seasons. Although cool water provides pleasure in the summer, the same water gives distress in the winter. Thus, both the perceptions of happiness and distress experienced through the senses are transitory. If we permit ourselves to be affected by them, we will sway like a pendulum from side to side. A person of discrimination should practice to tolerate both the feelings of happiness and distress without being disturbed by them.
Yam hi navyathayantyete Purusham purushashabha Samadukha sukham dhiram Somritatvaya kalpate.
Translation. O Arjun, noblest amongst men, that person who is not affected by happiness and distress and remains steady in both, becomes eligible for liberation. Explanation. In the previous verse, Sri Krishna explained that both the sensations of happiness and distress are fleeting. He now encourages Arjun to rise above these dualities through discrimination. In order to develop this discrimination, we first need to understand the answers to 2 important questions. 1. Why do we aspire for happiness? 2. Why doesn't material happiness satisfy us? The answer to the first question is very simple. God is an ocean of infinite bliss, and we souls are His tiny parts. This basically means that we are tiny fragments of an infinite ocean of bliss. Swami Vivekananda would address people by saying, "O ye children of immortal bliss." Just as a child is drawn to his or her mother, each part is naturally drawn toward its whole. Similarly, being infinitesimal parts of the ocean of bliss, we souls too are drawn to this bliss. Hence, everything we do in the world is for the sake of happiness. We all may have different views regarding where happiness lies or what form it might take, but all living beings seek nothing apart from it. This answers the first question. Now, let's understand the answer to the second question. The soul, being a tiny part of God, is divine in nature like God Himself. Hence the happiness that the soul seeks is also divine. Such happiness must possess the following three characteristics. It must be infinite in extent. It must be permanent. It must be ever fresh. Such is the happiness of God, which is described as Satchitnand, or eternal sentient ocean of bliss. However, the happiness we experience from the contact of the senses with their objects is the reverse. It is temporary, finite, and insentient. Thus, the material happiness that we perceive through the body can never satisfy the divine soul. With this discrimination, we must practice to tolerate the perception of material happiness. Similarly, we must tolerate the sensation of material distress. This second aspect is discussed in detail in many future verses, such as 2.48, 5.20, etc. Only then will we rise above these dualities, and the material energy will no longer bind us.
Na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate satah, ubhayorapi drushtontah, tvanayostattvadarshibhihi.
Translation. Of the transient there is no endurance, and of the eternal there is no cessation. This has verily been observed and concluded by the seers of the truth, after studying the nature of both. Explanation. According to the Hvetvatar Upanishad, there are three entities in existence. Bhokta Bhogya Preritra Cha Matv Sarva Proktatri Vidha Brahmetat 1.12 V13. Khara Pranamimit Khara Hara Khark Manvate Deva Eka 1.10 V14. Sanyuktin Tatham Khara Cha Vyakta Vyakta Bharte Vihvamha 1.8 V15. All these Ved mantras state that these three entities, God, the individual soul, and Maya, are all eternal. 1. God is everlasting. Thus He is Saturday, eternally existing. Hence, a name for Him in the Vedas is Satchitnand, eternal full of knowledge ocean of bliss. 2. The soul is imperishable, and hence it is Sat. However, the body will cease to exist one day, and hence it is Asat, temporary. The soul is also Satchitnand, but it is also Au, tiny. Hence the soul is Au Sat, Au Chit, and Au Nand. 3. The entity Maya from which the world has been made is eternal, or Sat. However, all material objects we see around us came into existence and will be destroyed with time. Thus, they can all be termed as Asat, or temporary. So while the world itself is Asat, it is only the entity Maya that is Sat. When we say that the world is Asat, this should not be confused with Mithi. Asat, temporary, does not mean Mithi, non-existent. Some philosophers claim that the world is Mithi, or non-existent. They assert that it is only the ignorance within us that is making us perceive the world, and once we are situated in Brahmajanna, knowledge of the Supreme, the world will cease to exist. However, if this were true, then the world should no longer have remained for the God-realized saints. Since they had destroyed their ignorance, the world should have stopped existing for them. Why then did these saints write books even after attaining the state of God-realization? Where did the paper and pen come from? The fact that Brahmajevit Macroninis use the objects of the world proves that the world exists even for them. Besides, even Brahmajevit Macroninis need food to nourish their bodies. The Vedic scriptures state, Pavadaigichvehat, V16, even God-realized saints feels hungry, just as animals do, and need to eat food. If the world does not exist for them, then how and why should they eat? Further, the Taittiriya Upanishad repeatedly informs us that God is all-pervading in the world. Sokmaita bahuesvayavit macron prajeti sa tapotapyata sa tapastaptav idasarvam saijata yadidaki chatatsitva tadevnu pravihat tadnu pravishya satchatyach bhavat nirukta cha nilayana cha vijna cha satyach nitam cha satyamabhavat yadidaki chatatsathyamithikakate tadpeha shloko bhavti 2.6.4 V17. This Vedic mantra states that God not only created the world, but also permeates every atom of it. If God is truly all-pervading in this world, then how can the world have no existence? To say that the world is mithi is to contradict the fact that God pervades the world. In this verse, Sri Krishna explains that the world does exist, but it is fleeting. Thus, he calls it as asat, or temporary. He does not call it mithi, or non-existent.
Avinashi tu tadviddhi yena sarvamidam tatam vinashamavyyasyasya na kaschit kartumarhati.
Translation: that which pervades the entire body, know it to be indestructible. No one can cause the destruction of the imperishable soul. Explanation: Sri Krishna establishes the relationship between the body and the soul by saying that the soul pervades the body. What does he mean by this? The soul is sentient, i.e., it possesses consciousness. The body is made from insentient matter, devoid of consciousness. However, the soul passes on the quality of consciousness to the body as well by residing in it. Hence, the soul pervades the body by spreading its consciousness everywhere in it. Some raise a question here regarding the location of the soul. The Vedas state that the soul resides in the heart. Hidi haya evit macron tm evit macron, Pranupnihad 3.6, V18. Sa vievit macron eha evit macron tm evit macron hidi, Chandogya Upnihad 8.3.3, V19. The word hidi indicates that the soul is seated in the region of the heart. Yet, consciousness, which is the symptom of the soul, spreads throughout the body. How does this happen? Ved Vyas explains this concept as follows. Avirodhashchandanvat, Brahmastra 2nd March 2023, V20. Just as applying sandalwood to your forehead cools the entire body, similarly, the soul, although residing locally in the heart, infuses its consciousness throughout the body. Again, someone may ask that if consciousness is a characteristic of the soul, then how does it spread into the body? This question has also been answered by Ved Vyas. Vyaktireko Gandhavat, Brahmastra 2nd March 2026, V21. Fragrance is a quality of the flower. But the garden where the flower grows also becomes fragrant. This means that the flower is able to pass on its fragrant quality to the garden. Likewise, the soul is sentient, and it also makes the dead matter of the body sentient by pervading its consciousness in it.
Antavanta ime deha नित्यस्योक्ता शरीरिणः अनाशिनो प्रमेयस्य तस्माद्युध्यक्स्व भारत.
Translation. Only the material body is perishable, the embodied soul within is indestructible, immeasurable, and eternal. Therefore, fight, O descendant of Bharat. Explanation. The gross body is factually made from mud. It is mud that gets converted to vegetables, fruits, grains, lentils, and grass. Cows graze the grass and produce milk. We humans consume these edibles, and they transform into our body. So it is not an exaggeration to say that the body is created from mud. And at the time of death, when the soul departs, the body can have one of the three ends, kimi, vi, or bhasma. Either it is burnt, in which case it is converted to ashes and becomes mud. Or it is buried, in which case insects eat it and transform it into mud. Else, it is thrown into the river, in which case the sea creatures make it their fodder and excrete it as waste, which ultimately merges with the mud of the seabed. In this manner, mud undergoes an amazing cycle in the world. It gets transformed into edibles, bodies are made from these edibles, and the bodies return back into the mud of the earth. The Bible states, "For dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return." Genesis 3:19, v22, this phrase refers to the material body. Shri Krishna tells Arjun, within that material body is an eternal imperishable entity, which is not made of mud. That is the divine soul, the real self.
य एनं वेत्ति हन्तारम् यश्चैनं मन्यते हतम् उभौ तौ न विजानीतो नायं हन्ति न हन्यते.
Translation. Neither of them is in knowledge, the one who thinks the soul can slay, and the one who thinks the soul can be slain. For truly, the soul neither kills nor can it be killed. Explanation. The illusion of death is created because we identify ourselves with the body. The Ramayana explains this as follows. Jao sapne sira kai ko, binu jeji na diarai dukho. v23. If we dream of our head getting cut, we will perceive its pain until we wake up. The incident in the dream is an illusion, but the experience of the pain continues to torment until we wake up and dispel the illusion. Similarly, in the illusion that we are the body, we fear the experience of death. For the enlightened soul whose illusion has been dispelled, this fear of death vanishes. One may ask that if nobody can kill anyone, then why is murder considered a punishable offense? The answer is that the body is the vehicle of the soul, and destroying any living being's vehicle is violence, which is forbidden. The Vedas clearly instruct, Emevit Macron Hinsit Sarvabtani, v24, do not commit violence toward anyone. In fact, the Vedas even consider killing of animals as a crime. However, there are occasions where the rules change and even violence becomes necessary. For example, in cases where a snake is approaching to bite, or if one is attacked with lethal weapons, or one's life sustenance is being snatched away, then violence is permitted for self-protection. In the present situation, what is appropriate for Arjun, violence or non-violence, and why? Shri Krishna will explain this to him in great detail, as the dialogue of the Bhagavad Gita progresses. And in the course of the explanation, priceless divine knowledge will be revealed to shed light on the subject.
न जायते म्रियते वा कदाचित् न्यायं भूत्वा भविता वा न भूयः अजो नित्यः शाश्वतोऽयं पुराणो न हन्यते हन्यमाने शरीरे.
Translation. The soul is neither born, nor does it ever die, nor having once existed, does it ever cease to be. The soul is without birth, eternal, immortal, and ageless. It is not destroyed when the body is destroyed. Explanation. The eternal nature of the soul has been established in this verse, which is ever existing and beyond birth and death. Consequently, it is devoid of the 6 types of transformations, asti, zyate, vardhate, viparyamate, apakhyate, and vinashyati, existence in the womb, birth, growth, procreation, diminution, and death. These are transformations of the body, not of the self. What we call as death is merely the destruction of the body, but the immortal self remains unaffected by all bodily changes. This concept has been repeatedly emphasized in the Vedas. The Kahupnihad contains a mantra almost identical to the above verse of the Bhagavad Gita. Na jate mriyate viyevit makron vipaschin naya kutaschin na babhva kaschit. Ajo nitya hvato yapuro na hanyate hanyamne harve. 1st February 2018, V25. The soul is not born, nor does it die. It did not spring from something, and nothing sprang from it. It is unborn, eternal, immortal, and ageless. It is not destroyed when the body is destroyed. The Bihadreka Upnihad states, Sa viyevit makron eha mahan ajat mazaro maro mito bhaya, 4th April 2025, V26. The soul is glorious, unborn, deathless, free from old age, immortal, and fearless.
Veda vinashinam nityam ya enamajam avyayam katham sapurusha partha kam ghatayati hantikam.
Translation. O Parth, how can one who knows the soul to be imperishable, eternal, unborn, and immutable kill anyone or cause anyone to kill? Explanation. A spiritually elevated soul quells the ego that makes us feel that we are the doers of our actions. In that state, one can see that the soul seated within actually does nothing. Such an elevated soul, though doing all kinds of actions, is never tainted by them. Shri Krishna is advising Arjuna that he must elevate himself to that enlightened level, seeing himself as the non-doer, free from egotism, and perform his duty rather than shirk from it.
Vasansi jirnani yatha vihaya navani gृह्णाति naroparani tatha sharirani vihaya jirna nyanyani sanyati navani dehi.
Translation. As a person sheds worn-out garments and wears new ones, likewise, at the time of death, the soul casts off its worn-out body and enters a new one. Explanation. Continuing to explain the nature of the soul, Shri Krishna reiterates the concept of rebirth, comparing it to an everyday activity. When garments become torn and useless, we discard them in favor of new ones, but in doing so we do not change ourselves. In the same manner, the soul remains unchanged when it discards its worn-out body and takes birth in a new body elsewhere. The Nyaya Darshan gives the following argument to prove the existence of rebirth. Jatasya Harhabhai Hoka Sampratipatte, 3rd January 2018, V27. It states that if you observe a little baby, you will find it sometimes becomes happy, sometimes sad, and sometimes fearful, without any apparent reason. According to the Nyaya Darshan, the little baby is remembering its past life, and hence experiencing these emotions. However, as it grows up, the impressions of the present life are imprinted so strongly upon its mind that they erase most past memories. Besides, the processes of death and birth are also so painful to the soul that they erase a substantial portion of the past life's memories. The Nya Darshan gives another argument in support of rebirth. Stainable Hilt, 3rd January 2021, V28, it says that a newborn baby has no knowledge of language. How then can a mother teach her baby to suckle her breast when she inserts it in the baby's mouth? However, the newborn child has drunk milk in infinite past lifetimes, even in animal forms, from the breasts, teats, and udders of innumerable mothers. Hence, when the mother puts her breast in the baby's mouth, it automatically starts suckling based on past practice.
Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavakaha, na chainam kledayantyapo, na shoshayati marutaha.
Translation: Weapons cannot shred the soul, nor can fire burn it. Water cannot wet it, nor can the wind dry it. Explanation: Consciousness, which is the symptom of the soul, can be perceived by material instruments, but the soul itself cannot be contacted by any material object. This is so only because the soul is divine, and hence beyond the interactions of material objects. Sri Krishna expresses this vividly by saying that wind cannot wither the soul, nor can water moisten it or fire burn it.
Achedyo yamadakyo yam akledyo shoshya evacha nitya sarvagatasthanu achaloyam sanatanaha.
Translation: The soul is unbreakable and incombustible. It can neither be dampened nor dried. It is everlasting in all places, unalterable, immutable, and primordial. Explanation: The point about immortality is again being driven home here. For the teacher to merely impart perfect knowledge is not enough. For that knowledge to be useful, it must sink deep into the heart of the student. Hence, a skillful teacher often repeats a point previously made. In Sanskrit literature, this is called punarukti or repetition. Sri Krishna has often used punarukti as a tool in the Bhagavad Gita for stressing the important spiritual principles to ensure that they are grasped deeply by his student.